Hello and welcome to A Critical Dragon, where I talk about narrative in film, television, and in books. And today I am joined by Jimmy Nuts from the Fantasy Nuttwork. Hello, Jimmy.
My friend, how are you? I feel like we haven't chatted in a while, and I'm excited to be here. I'm batting in the big leagues, the real intellectuals of what we do, and I'm excited because I've learned so much from these videos and you doing these analysis, and I've used these methods. Whenever I start to review books, I try to do the close rating. So I guess we're going to see if my practice has paid off.
And you've perfectly introduced what we're going to be doing, which is obviously looking at the start of a prologue. We're not doing the whole thing because otherwise we will be here until Christmas. But we're going to have a look at basically it's about the first page and a half, 2 pages, depending on your edition, of A Game of Thrones, the prologue from A Game of Thrones by George R.R. Martin. A work that you not only know intimately, but you're a big fan of. You know the stuff inside out. And I thought this would be a good opportunity because I do this stuff and you sort of go like, does anyone actually get anything out of this? But it's nice being able to talk to someone else about it. So what I am going to do is I'm going to show, I have it on 2 slides and I will put the first one up and we can start talking through it. Okay. So that suit you?
Yeah. This is this is the perfect scenario, perfect prologue for us. It's one of my favorites of all time. Very excited.
Now, the weird thing is because this is actually on my other screen, I'm going to keep doing this.
Don't worry, I'm looking back and forth as well. I'm still figuring out my setup right now for screen sharing. So
neither one of us are going to be looking at the camera. We are experts. We're professionals. So why don't I read through just the first couple of bits here, and then we'll pause and talk about what we can glean from that information.
Yes.
We should start back, Garrett urged, as the woods began to grow dark around them. The wildlings are dead. Do the dead frighten you? Sir Waymar Royce asked with just a hint of a smile. Garrett did not rise to the bait. He was an old man, past 50, and he had seen the lordlings come and go. Dead is dead, he said. We have no business with the dead. Are they dead? Royce asked softly. What proof have we? Will saw them, Garrett said. If he says they are dead, that's proof enough for me. So just going to stop here because this is the opening and it is essentially a dialogue exchange. So we haven't gotten into any in-depth exposition yet. There's one sort of major sentence of exposition, but it's essentially just a dialogue exchange. So what can we glean from this, James?
The first thing I think of when I read these first intro lines here are that this is not a land where people live very long, because if an old man is just past 50, this has to be a very cruel land. Also, the fact that we're saying lordlings have come and go, that means a lot of people die young. In whatever position these people are in, if we're just looking at this context and not thinking about like who, the Night's Watch and all this stuff, and Garrett is one that has survived it. So that tells me that Waymar Royce, and obviously with the Sir title, maybe a bit noble, and Garrett is not. Garrett is just Garrett. So even the naming conventions kind of tip my ears. But I love that he was an old man past 50, as if that was like surprising.
Right. So that's a really good point. I agree. But let's think about this information without the context of your further information about the book. Mm-hmm. So if someone says he was an old man past 50, you have immediately said, oh, well, that means they think that past 50 is old. Therefore, yes. Mortality is, you're going to die young. Mm-hmm. Is there another way to perceive that information? If the person who was the point of view is 18, they will think that 50 is really old. If the point of view person was 70, they might think that 50 is actually quite young and robust. So you always have to remember, while I think you've gotten the information that we're meant to get out of it, but until you know the point of view, and whether or not it is being focalized through a character. This is the sort of thing that, because you chose that one interpretation of two different ways of thinking about it, you have locked onto one meaning, and it could have meant the other. And okay, it's a 50-50, and yes, you're right, but at the same time, you could have been wrong, and that would have sent you down the wrong path. So it's just to be aware that when you take information like that, particularly when it is a judgment about old or young, or that's a very steep hill. Well, did that person grow up in the mountains and therefore it is really steep? Or did they grow up on like the flat plains, in which case it is a gradual incline that even I can manage, but they think it's steep. So just to be aware of that. But if we go back to the very beginning, we've actually talked about, I think we were discussing this on the Discord server, that look at that opening line. What are the things that you are generally told? Because you've been writing. What are the things that you're generally told to do with your opening? What do you have to establish?
Perspective, I would assume.
Well, let's think about it. Opening a scene, you typically describe the scene so that there is a location that the reader can sort of imagine where these people are standing, because otherwise it's just a white space. The other thing that you try to establish then is establishing the scene sort of physically, but also temporally, and in terms of time. And if you look at this opening sentence, urged as the woods began to grow dark around them. So we know they are standing in woods, and we also know the time of day because it's evening time, because they're beginning to grow dark. So the sun is setting. And so very, very subtly, Martin, in describing the woods began to grow dark around them, has given us the setting of where they are standing and the time of day, without going, it was evening time in the woods, as the men stood around. It's a way of giving you the information without being blunt about it. This is, when people talk about show and tell, this is Martin showing us the scene, not telling us that men are standing in some woods, that it is the evening time. This is Martin showing it to us and letting us realize that as we read.
And also starting it in the middle almost of a scene in itself, right? We should start back. Like, they've already been talking, and this is something that he does throughout all of his books. Almost every chapter begins at the middle of a scene, which immediately you say, we should start back. Well, back to where?
And it makes it feel more natural, because the characters are not speaking formally. They're not going, Sir Waymar Royce, let me address you. What is it, Garrod, the ranger? Well, I believe that we should return to the keep now. And why would you say that? You know, that would be really stilted. It wouldn't feel natural. Whereas what you have here is naturalistic dialogue.
Yeah, definitely.
But when we think about it, you had mentioned that this sort of sets up that, a time period, it's archaic, that sort of feel of it being fantasy. There are another couple of aspects of that. So first of all, we should start back. Using the word start is slightly old-fashioned, isn't it? Because quite like I think more normally would say we should head back or we should go back, rather than we should start back. So it's not a major thing, but it's sort of the first little chip in that area. The wildlings are dead. So wildlings, unexplained. We have no idea what the wildlings are. They might make your heart sing. Oh no, those are wild things. And then we have what is very, very clever, Sir Waymar Royce. So how is Sir being spelled?
S-E-R, which is how I spell it now.
So we assume that it is the same as Sir, S-I-R, but it's being spelt differently. So we get this sense of landed gentry, nobility, the things that are common to a lot of fantasy. So that in combination with the wildlings. And then lordlings. So wildlings and lordlings. There's a nice sort of pairing of those. But again, referring to lords as a sort of typical thing. Again, it's giving us that insight into setting, into the genre in which we are reading. It's not definitive, but you can see how these little tiny things add up. It's not that it's all being delivered all at once. It's incrementally building the scene out, incrementally building the sense of the world.
Yeah, and it kind of pieces onto itself. And I actually really like the distinction that you brought up, the fact that wildlings and lordlings here really are paired. And with very little exposition has already began to craft the scene that starts just in some dark woods.
Yeah. So there are 3 names mentioned in just this opening bit of dialogue. What can we tell from the use of the names? Is there anything that stands out to you?
So just off the top of my head, obviously Sir Waymar Royce having a Sir title makes him probably in charge. I would assume. And then the other names being, well, I guess Royce also gets mentioned without Sir, but it's at least introduced with Sir Waymar Royce. But with Garrett and Will's names not having any kind of title ahead of them, I assume that they're beneath Sir Waymar or Sir Waymar.
Exactly. So the first person we are introduced to is Garrett. Like Madonna or Prince, he only has one name, but we assume it's a first name. He has one name. We're like, okay, maybe everyone in this world has one name. That's a very common thing in fantasy. And then we get Sir Waymar Royce. It's not only his full name, Waymar Royce, but a title as well. It's very formal. Yes. So who do you feel closer to? Garrett or Sir Waymar Royce? Where are your allegiances as a reader? Who are you feeling closer to?
I feel closer to Garrett because he's more like me, just James.
Exactly. We are closer to him in terms of the sort of the psychic distance. It's his first name. It's intimate. Whereas Sir Waymar Royce, that is very formal and therefore further back. It is far less intimate. And then we have the other person referred to as Will. So we have 2 people who just have first names, and this other person who was introduced with their full name and their honorific. And then to avoid repetition of just constantly using that full name, he's referred to the next time with his surname. So if you think about it, this is typically what we do in a formal situation. We refer to people's surnames. So we would talk about like the author, Martin. We don't call him George. Like, we're not friends. If we were talking about him personally in a conversation, it would be George. But if we're talking about his work, it's a sort of more formal thing, and we would talk about Martin.
Martin, yep.
So by using that convention in Western culture, Royce, although it is going down to one name, is still formal. Mm-hmm. And that's why, Will and Garrett, we feel closer to. They're good strapping lads, men of the people. Sir Waymar Royce, he's one of those lords way over there and very separate.
Mm-hmm. And also makes you wonder at this point, who's telling you this? Like, whose perspective are you sitting in? And I've read this prologue a million times, but I actually had somehow forgotten this time that it was from Will's perspective. And at this point, you could honestly maybe consider the fact that maybe it's Garrett's perspective, right?
You would think that. No, obviously it is confirmed in the very next sentence, that first next sort of bit of exposition. Will had known they would drag him into the quarrel sooner or later. He wished it had been later rather than sooner. So the reason this immediately locates it as Will's point of view is what? How do we know it's Will's point of view?
I took it as in Will had known it's inner dialogue, right? It's the expectation that Will had known that they would drag him. So there's almost this like he's been watching quietly, and now we're getting exposed to him right after getting his name.
So if you think Garrett urged as the woods began to grow dark around them, that's external. He urged.
Mhm.
It's someone saying something in a certain manner. So that's external information. It's what is being performed. Sir Waymar Royce asked with just the hint of a smile. Again, that's something you can see. You can hear someone urging something. You can see someone smiling. Garrett didn't rise to the bit. And you go, well, I'm watching this and he didn't get triggered. And then he was an old man past 50. So again, that's an external evaluation. There's nothing internal to that. He had seen the lordlings come and go. It's about his level of experience. Dead is dead. So again, we're getting reports. Everything is external. All of this information so far is something that you can glean just by watching the scene.
Yes.
And then you get Will had known they would drag him into the quarrel sooner or later. He wished it had been later. That's all internal. There's no way that you can look at someone and go, oh, he'd known they were going to. You're guessing at their interiority. You're guessing at their motivations, their thoughts, their feelings. So that's why all the other information has been external. And then we get this one line that we suddenly get the internal. So that's where we're getting our limited perspective from, limited third person. And it is partly in Will's brain.
Yeah, that's a pretty good point about the external to the internal, and also really reshapes the past 50 line that I had kind of taken as a hint towards the world, whereas really it's a hint towards the perspective.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And that's cool. That is one of the really cool things about when you're reading through, because you did that. As soon as you got to that, he was an old man past 50, you go, oh, I know what this means. That information can always be recontextualized depending on perspective. And in order to sort of, it's one of those, you then think back and you can alter the information retrospectively. But it is always something to bear in mind that what characters see, think, hear, feel, believe may not be objectively true because it could be influenced by their perspective. And it's a great way for authors to play with expectations, to alter our view of the events. And if you look so quickly in just those opening lines, Martin has established the setting. He's established the time of night. He's established social hierarchies. He's established genre. He's established, what do we know? Before we've gotten any further, without anything else, what do we know about the personalities of Garrett and Sir Waymar Royce? Take Garrett. What do we know about Garrett?
He's experienced and careful.
Experienced, careful. So in your head, you're thinking he is the gruff veteran. He is the experienced one. He's done this 1,000 times. He knows what he's talking about. And that comes across in, how did you get that information?
We actually get it from the fact, at least I did, from he was an old man past 50 and he had seen lordlings come and go. Dead is dead. We have no business with the dead. Very matter of fact.
And also, he didn't rise to the bait. Someone is trying to goad him, and he's like, just ignore it. Like, that's not the important thing. So we actually get a good sense of Garrett. Down to earth, feet on the ground, dirt under his fingernails. He's a grizzled veteran of some description. What about Sir Waymar Royce?
Antagonistic, maybe a bit arrogant. Just a bit.
Well, they're standing in these woods. It's getting dark. And someone says, the wildlings are dead. And this guy goes, do the dead frighten you?
Me.
It's the attitude of, here we are, we're doing this thing. These people are all dead. And it's, oh, so the dead frighten you then? You go, that's not the point. What are you talking about? Focus on what's important here. He's more interested in goading one of the other people than actually doing his job. So we already get that. And then it's coupled with just the hint of a smile. Now, I don't know about you, But I'm sort of imagining this as a smirk, as that arrogant smirk across his face of, oh, so the dead frighten you, do they? Because it's a hint of a smile.
Mm-hmm.
If it had been he smiled, we could have gone, oh, well, maybe he's joking.
Yes.
But because it's a hint of a smile, it's clearly not a joke. He's not joshing with his friends.
Yeah, it's meant to antagonize for sure.
And then we get that important word, lordling. He's not a proper lord. He's inexperienced. He's basically, we're just getting the sense that he's arrogant and inexperienced and doesn't know what he's doing and is lording it over the others.
Yeah, and also maybe even relishing a bit in the moment.
Yeah, because when they go, the wildlings are dead, do the dead frighten you? Dead is dead. We have no business with the dead. Are they dead? What proof have we? Notice the formality of that. What proof have we? Not what proof do we have. What proof have we? Prithee, tell me. But someone's come up and gone, listen, these guys are all dead. And it's, well, where's the proof? Yes, because I just thought I would come here and tell you that all these other people are dead because I have nothing better to do with my time.
Yeah.
That his attitude is basically being a bit of a shit.
Yeah, it also kind of makes you see that Garrett, even though we, if we just look at the dialogue, we haven't really been introduced to Will and Garrett interacting at all, but it feels like Garrett trusts his brother of like Will, the other companion that's with him, whereas Royce maybe like, how do I know he's telling the truth? Doubting him immediately. There's not a trust there.
Because exactly, Garrett says, if he says they are dead, that's proof enough for me. That he didn't have to go around cutting people's hands off or getting a hold of the heads to bring back and go, look, dead people. He's a scout. Like, you trust your scouts, you trust the men that you send out to give you accurate reports. And he's going, listen, if he says that they're all dead, they're dead. Let's get out of here. And it's, well, I haven't seen it with my own eyes. So this is someone who doesn't trust the people they're with, thinks that he's better than them, has that sense of arrogance, and is far more interested in asserting his dominance over the others than actually doing the job. Coupled with the fact that he is a noble and we are distanced from him in that sort of formal thing, and we are siding and closer with Garrett, you can see how in just those lines of dialogue, Martin has set up this entire dynamic.
Yeah, it's actually very carefully put together, huh?
Yeah.
Wow.
So if you think of what typically you have in an opening, so we've had setting, we have character, we have a sense of who these characters are, we know what time of day it is, and now let's talk about content. What is, because people talk about you need a hook, you need action, you need something happening. What's the big hook here?
Well, the wildlings are dead. Why are they dead? Why did they kill them? And also, why is Garrett so ready to start back? So, why is he feeling cautious?
I can't, because it's on display, I can't highlight them. How many times is the word dead used?
It is used 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 times.
Are you sure?
Well, I might have missed one.
The wildlings are dead. 1. Do the dead frighten you? 2. Dead is dead. That's 3 and 4. We have no business with the dead. Oh, we're up to 5. Are they dead? 6. Will saw them. If he says they're dead, would that be 7?
And there's 7 kingdoms.
So, now, conventional wisdom would say, avoid repetition. Don't repeat stuff. And yet, what we have here in very few words, if look at how many words that are, and 7 of them are dead. There's an overwhelming sense of death here. It's being emphasized quite heavily.
Yeah, I would say so. Yeah.
So you have people standing in the woods, it's getting dark, and the word dead keeps cropping up. So this seems a little ominous now. It's not a couple of guys standing in the woods, the shadows are coming down. You go, oh, well, we get the fire going and have a barbecue and maybe have a couple of beers. It's not that sense. The atmosphere here is entirely different because of that repetition of dead.
Yeah, then you kind of start playing with it. You know, the fact that Royce, I mean, we do think he's a bit arrogant, but another thing that I kind of felt whenever I read this opening right here is, okay, what does it mean to be dead? Like it almost feels like there is a fear of the dead in a way. And you start to kind of play with the fact that, okay, like obviously I had the context of the full prologue, right? Where we see the ice, you know, we see the others. But even here, I feel like it's kind of playing around like, well, why is there this ominous feeling of the dead? Not just because they're dead, but like something else. You know what I mean?
And this is so what we were just talking about there is the surface level. So let's talk about subtext.
Mm-hmm.
Why would someone say dead is dead? You don't need to clarify that dead is dead.
Mm.
They're emphasizing it. Why would you emphasize it? And you go, well, on the surface, well, he's just saying that thing. But subtly, there is a subtextual thing here that sometimes dead isn't dead, that there's another sense of it. And then it's if he says they are dead, that's proof enough for me. So again, claiming that something is dead, but it may not be dead.
Yes.
No, that's subtext. That's, you know, going with the atmosphere. And obviously, as the prologue goes on, that is given a lot more weight. And if this was your very first time looking at this, you might not pick up on that. But when you get to that section, when you encounter that sort of thing happening, you think back to that and go, that was very subtly sort of foreshadowed. It was little tiny breadcrumbs placed that, it didn't come out of the blue. It's been building towards this. And that's how Martin has done it.
Yeah, and that's something that he does all throughout the series. There's certain words he repeats. Actually, others is mentioned quite a few times throughout these books. And a lot of times when we arrive at the big moments of the series, it's as readers who reread, you can go back and kind of see this building. There's momentum.
Now, if we move on just a little bit to the section with Will. So we've established now, because of the internal information, Will is actually our point of view.
Mm-hmm.
And obviously, Will, again, introduced one name, and it's a first name. So we have that closeness. Will had known they would drag him into the quarrel sooner or later. He wished it had been later rather than sooner. To be perfectly honest, I am not overly fond of this repetition.
I agree.
Even though it's a nice mirroring, they were going to drag him in sooner or later, and he'd wish it had been later rather than sooner. There's a nice flow and rhythm to that. But you know, we all have different preferences, and my preference would be no, we didn't need that line.
Yeah, I actually agree, and in some ways, it almost feels a little. I don't want to use the word modern. I don't know. There's something about it. When I read it, it kind of stuck out to me. I think maybe it could be to show that Will isn't like the most educated. I don't know if that's a good thing to extrapolate from that, but for me, yeah, I would agree. I think out of the entire prologue, this is the piece that I felt was the clunkiest, I guess.
And it could very well be that, yeah, because it's a repetition in a slightly different way, it's showing Will being slightly slower of thought. That could be the intention behind it. But like I said, you know, we all have personal preferences, and looking at that, someone will go, "Oh, yeah, that's a mistake." And you go, "It's not necessarily a mistake. It could just simply be something that doesn't work for us, or is doing something else, but it isn't being communicated clearly enough or effectively enough for us to be definitive about it."
Yeah, it kind of feels like a cliche in some ways, right? Like,
but what's interesting is the sing-song nature of that. The choral sooner or later, he'd wish it had been later rather than sooner. So there's a kind of sing-song aspect to that, just, you know, as you're saying it. And then he follows up with, "My mother told me that dead men sing no songs." So the sing-song nature of it, and he actually goes with songs. But what I find really curious here is if we think of the dialogue, so if we cut out everything else, we should start back. The wildlings are dead. Do the dead frighten you? Dead is dead. We have no business with the dead. Are they dead? What proof have we? Will saw them. If he says they're dead, that's proof enough for me. My mother told me that dead men sing no songs. Will is kind of coming in, taking the conversation on a bit of a left at the traffic lights.
Yeah.
Which adds to that feeling that he's not the sharpest tool in the
Yeah.
box.
Yeah, and maybe he's a little bit adverse to conflict.
But because we've had all of those intervening sentences and partial sentences with the dialogue, you don't realize quite how much Will turns left at the traffic lights on that statement. Because we've had Will had known they would, we had that breaking up our sense of how the conversation was going. But as soon as you put it just the conversation, and it's, my mother told me that dead men sing those songs, it's like,
thanks, Will.
Cheers. You've really added to the conversation, mate.
This is how some people are feeling listening to this as I chime in. Gee, thanks, Jim.
But what's hilarious then is Royce's line, my wet nurse said the same thing, Will.
Such a snooty thing.
So there are a couple of put downs embedded into that I don't think we need to go fully into. But here's something that that Martin does, which gives you another indication about the type of book that you are reading. Never believe anything you hear at a woman's tit. And okay, so it's not outright rude, like it's not really rude swearing, but he has used an informal word for a bit of female anatomy, which you wouldn't expect in sort of dialogue like this so early on.
Mm-hmm.
And it's used casually about something else. It's not even in the description of a female character. So that gives you an indication about maybe there might be some swearing and naughty things said in this novel.
Yes.
And it could build from here.
Just maybe.
But there are things to be learned even from the dead. So again, emphasizing dead. Like, look at that word keeps getting used. It is building up that ominous tension.
Yeah.
But this is the next bit here. His voice echoed too loud in the twilit forest. So, what do we have with this? How would you explain the importance of this line?
His voice echoed too loud in the twilit forest. Well, obviously, it's getting even darker. But too loud is a sense of like you almost don't want to be like you don't want to be recognized. You want to pass unawares, which is an interesting thing that he's being loud when he doesn't believe that the wildlings might be dead, and that would give away position. Like it kind of reinforces the fact that he's a bit of a boob to me. But yeah, his voice echoed, so it's empty, it's desolate. Like there's not a lot there, and too loud.
Yeah, those are very key about characterization of Royce, at least for me, because his voice echoed. So that's giving us a sense of emptiness, of this very hollow, cold void because of the echoing, but also too loud. And exactly as you pointed out, they're standing in the forest in the dark. They're talking about, are these people dead? And he's talking loudly. The others are clearly, they're out somewhere. They're scouting things. They're looking at things. And he's acting as if he's in some keep, talking to his friend. He's in a bar having a drink. And he's being loud. He's being boisterous. He's being arrogant. That again, it's going to his arrogance and his characterization as inexperienced, dangerous, because he's potentially revealing their location. But his arrogance and his inexperience are very subtly emphasized by echoed and too loud. And as you point out, twilight forest. So time is progressing. It is getting darker. They are in a forest. All of that is now confirmed. And we've moved from woods to forest, and it was growing dark and is now twilight. So there's your avoiding repetition. Martin knows how to avoid repetition, which means the repetition of dead is probably very, very deliberate.
Yeah. And also kind of reaffirming this dead thing is the fact that it is obvious that Garrett says dead is dead. We have no business with the dead. Like whatever may happen after they are dead, we have no business with it. And the naivety of Royce is that he's like, well, even the dead may have something to tell us. And it's like, well, what do you talk? Like you just tell the experienced person here is like, we no need to delve into these mysteries. We're good. And Royce is saying, oh no, I need to know. You know, he's just so naive.
Now, there's another thing to point out with the use of the word dead. It's being used in different ways with different meanings attributed to it. The dead, a noun, dead people. They are dead, state of being. And so it's subtly saying there's more than one way to think about dead, which goes with those other things that you had pointed out earlier, that there is this subtext that is slowly building up here.
Mm-hmm.
And then, as you point out, there are things to be learned even from the dead. So yeah, there's a big emphasis on the dead. There's a big emphasis on investigation of this, and there's something unknown about them.
Yeah, and it almost starts to build like not a mythology, right? But like the superstitions of this world are even starting to kind of come to the forefront with his curiosity.
No, and interestingly enough, if you are sitting around and you're at home and it's snowy outside and it's dark and it's winter and you have the fire roaring and your friends are there and you're sitting having a chat and you tell ghost stories and everyone has a good chuckle. Now, imagine that you're standing out in the middle of a forest in the middle of the night and it's dark and it's cold and someone starts telling ghost stories. Do they maybe feel a little bit different?
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Your surroundings are very, very important. Context is very important. So they've been discussing this. Will has chimed in with his genius comment, which Royce has obviously put down. And then Garrett continues with, we have a long ride before us, Garrett pointed out. 8 days, maybe 9, and night is falling. So we've gone from growing dark, twilight, and now we're getting night. So there's a nice progression of time indicated by growing dark, twilight is next, and then the next time it's mentioned, it's night. So you can see that's the natural order that shadows and time progresses.
Yeah, and then also getting more context of how far into this journey they, should start back assumes that you have reached at least a distance from your starting point. And now we know that it's 8, maybe 9 days and night is falling.
Now, the other thing is we have a long ride before us. Until now, did you know there were horses in this scene?
Nope.
But even though he hasn't said he patted his horse or the horse did, we now know there's horses in the scene.
More details, slowly building out the scene.
And again, Martin did that not by directing us to the horse, but through casual conversation, revealing that they are writing. And that's how you can feed exposition to the reader through dialogue that is not about that particular piece of information you're trying to feed to the reader. Because obviously we have a long ride before us. He's talking about the journey they have to make, but we are getting the information. Oh, they have horses.
Mm-hmm.
So that's how Martin uses some of the dialogue to do double duty. It pushes the scene forward, it pushes the dialogue forward, it feels natural to the scene, but it is also feeding exposition to the reader.
Yeah, it's really getting a lot of use. It's very efficient, and this whole prologue, in my opinion, is pretty efficient. And one of the things that I've heard Jenny Ward say is like when dialogue is happening, very rarely can you move the action forward. Like everything is coming to a standstill. But you're getting a lot of exposition here that just happens to be packed into the dialogue. I like this. I like this approach a lot.
So if we look then at just very quickly at the dialogue tags, Garrett urged, Garrett said, Garrett pointed out. And then when we think of that, this is all Garrett trying to take charge, but in a polite way.
Mm-hmm.
He is trying to direct things. He is trying to steer them towards courses of action. But clearly, he's not the one in charge. Because he's pointing these things out so that Sir Waymar Royce can make the decision.
Mm-hmm.
And again, that's just done with the dialogue tags. Little subtle things like that. So when he says, night is falling, and again, we had Sir Waymar Royce, then Royce again, and now Sir Waymar Royce. We've gone back into very formal distance again. Sir Waymar glanced at the sky with disinterest. You know this person now. He's a jumped up, arrogant little shit who thinks he knows everything, who thinks he's better than everyone else. We know exactly who Sir Waymar Royce is. Yeah.
And also the fact that Sir Waymar Royce is his full title is used when he's being height of his arrogancy, right? Like, do the dead frighten you? It does that about every day about this time. Are you unmanned by the dark, Garrett? Like, it's funny that his actual title, which lets us know, that he might be a bit of an elite or a lordling, is paired with his worst moments.
So again, think of what is happening in the scene. We should start back. The wildlings are dead, and Royce basically goes, "Well, what proof that they're dead?" And listen, they're dead. We have a long ride. It's 8 or 9 days. And are you afraid of the dark? Do the dead frighten you? He's not focused on what they are doing. He is constantly trying to needle and get a rise out of these other people. Instead of focusing on the task at hand. Do you remember all those stories that they frequently told about, like the people or the soldiers serving in Vietnam, and they would get some raw recruit or raw green lieutenant or someone straight out of the academy would be shipped in country and be given a platoon to look after, and they were straight out of officer training and they were green as anything, and basically all the veterans are going, "Oh God, they're going to get us killed, aren't they?"
Like they're going to be Paran.
This is the sense that you get from this, that Garrett is the experienced sergeant who he's the veteran, he's been there. Will is the, "Oh, you're a good guy, Will, but you're a couple of sandwiches short of a picnic."
Yeah, like, he's not on the head.
He's a nice guy. We get on well with him, but and you could, as soon as if you supervise him and you tell him exactly what he has to do, he's brilliant. He's a good guy. So we sort of know Will as well, and now we know Royce. He is the inexperienced, brand new, young, arrogant commander who is going to get everyone killed.
Yep, he sure is.
And this is before we have gone beyond this section.
Yeah. Wow.
So if we can now look at this is where suddenly we transition into expositionary information being loaded in here, because that was almost all dialogue.
Mm-hmm.
And now we're getting the explanation for things. So I don't think we need to be quite as robust in analyzing this, because this is already longer than I usually go now with these things. But again, we are with Will's perspective. It is absolutely confirmed here, because Will could see the tightness around Garrett's mouth. So it's not that Garrett's mouth tightened. It's we get confirmation that Will can see it. So we're getting Will's point of view. The barely suppressed anger in his eyes under the thick black hood of his cloak. This is the first time that we get any sort of real sense, physical description of them, apart from he's old. And now we get he's wearing a thick black hooded cloak. That's all the physical description we've gotten. They are in woods. What type of woods? What do the woods look like? No idea. It's dark. And he's wearing a cloak. You have no other physical clues about these characters, and yet you already know who the characters are.
Yeah, and we're also seeing Garrett's shell starting to crack, because before, when he was not rising to take the bait, clearly he's starting to get more annoyed that it's now visual.
And he had spent 40 years in the Night's Watch, man and boy. Night's Watch, capitalized, it's a proper noun, so we know it's an organization of some kind. Man and boy, like he's dedicated his whole life. We see how experienced he is from this. And he was not accustomed to being made light of. So he's not accustomed to people making fun of him. He's accustomed to being respected for who and what he is. And then here we get where we've been talking earlier about that subtext. Will could sense something else in the older man. You could taste it, a nervous tension that came perilous close to fear. Will shared his unease. Nervous tension, fear, unease. That's all now being worked in to build on the earlier sort of atmosphere and tension that we were getting from the repetition of the word dead.
Mm-hmm.
So if you were going to pick out anything from those first two paragraphs that you think is important.
I feel like all of the experience from Garrett is built up for the fact that if he is feeling fear, like this is not like perilous close to fear, meaning that Garrett, it takes a lot to get him to this point. Like even at this point, it's pretty close to him being scared. And that should be indicator enough that things are going to go south, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And so I would add in, we get this confirmation that Garrett has 40 years in the Night Watch, that he is a veteran, that he is someone who has a lot of experience in this. And now we also get a sense of who Will is as well, because he had been 4 years on the wall. So the wall's capitalized, another proper noun. So it's a proper place. And we're presuming that's where they're riding back to. That's 8 or 9 days ride. The first time he had been sent beyond, all the old stories had come rushing back, and his bowels had turned to water. Again, that's a slightly archaic, formal way of putting being brown trouser time. What?
I like that. Code Brown, you know.
He had laughed about it afterward. He was a veteran of 100 rangings by now. So even though he had only served 4 years, he's done 100 of these rangings. And again, using a word that we're not quite familiar with, but he's done 100. He's a veteran. Garrett has been doing this for 40 years, 10 times longer. And Garrett is the one going, we should go. We need to leave. We should be going now. And their commander is not listening to the voice of experience. And then we have endless dark wilderness, haunted forest, terror. No more terrors for him. So we've just gone from a nervous tension, perilous, close to fear, shared his unease. We then have, his bowels had turned to water. This endless dark wilderness, haunted forest, and no more terrors. So even though he's saying it has no more terrors, sort of in that direction, we're getting the build up of this language toward no, things are very bad.
Mm-hmm.
So even though the narrative is or Will is telling us one thing, we're sensing the exact opposite.
Yeah, and on top of that, it kind of starts off with the wildlings are dead, like mission accomplished. Things must be going pretty well for these folks. And then all of a sudden, look at this atmosphere change to something very, very spooky.
And again, we have there was an edge to this darkness that made his hackles rise. So this isn't a normal stillness. This isn't the normal ranging. There is something wrong here. And again, it just is building incrementally over the paragraphs, little phrases, keywords here and there as you're reading down about other things. But as you read down, it is building it up instead of they stood there. They could feel that the forest was scary. They were beginning to feel afraid. They were nervous. Like, it's not saying those things. It's not being bald and in your face and telling you these things. It's letting you feel them, letting it slowly build.
Yeah, and also in this exposition, we're not seeing a bunch of stuff like, they got on their horses and began to ride or anything like that. Like, there's not a lot of action moving forward here. This really is scene setting and atmosphere setting.
Yeah, and like there's no action. It's just them talking.
Yeah, yeah.
It's bunch of fellas standing in the woods having a chat,
as you do.
And that's the advice that every writer is given. Open up your novel with a couple of people just having a conversation in the middle of the woods. Don't have any action. Just have them having a chat. And it's then that we get this further sort of detail about things, because now we get their mission, hard on the track of a band of wildling raiders. So we know that's what the wildlings are. They are raiders. So now we're thinking, oh, well, these guys must be the good guys. If the wildlings are raiders, these are the defenders or the avengers. Each day had been worse than the day that had come before. Today was the worst of all. And you go, that again is a repetition that I am not overly fond of. If each day had been worse than the day that had come before it, then yes, obviously today is the worst of all.
That's kind of fit Will, right?
Exactly. It's Will has these repetitions.
Yeah.
And again, it's one of those ones you go, oh, and it looks wrong. It feels wrong until you realize the point of view that you are in. And, a number of times, I have said that when you're focalized through something or when you're trying to reflect a character perspective, sometimes that can change what the rules of good writing are.
Mm-hmm.
Because you're trying to reflect the character through the exposition. So this exposition is giving us the information that, yeah, today's a bad day. That's what is being communicated to us. But it is telling us something about Will's character. He is slow of thought. He is laborious in how he works these things out.
Yeah, I could even see him being like, and today was the worst of all, and everyone just turning sideways. You know what I mean? Like, it actually it fits almost here.
And it's a cold wind was blowing out of the north, and it made the trees rustle like living things. You're like, yes, well, you do realize the trees are alive.
Yeah.
But you can perfectly now imagine this. It's not that he is a simpleton, but you can see that he is not quite as smart as the others.
Yes.
And it allows for this quite laborious sort of exploration of things. It allows Martin to use things like a cold wind was blowing out of the north, which we would assume, it's quite stereotypical that the north is cold and that's where cold winds, it feels quite obvious. But he can get away with it because Will's point of view is the sort of laborious, obvious noting of things. It's not sophisticated. All day, Will had felt as though something were watching him, something cold and implacable that loved him not. And that loved him not. Again, very nice sort of reversal of the standard way of saying something to make it archaic.
Mm-hmm.
to give you that sense of the fantasy world. And this is what Le Guin talked about in From Elfland to Poughkeepsie, her essay on this. The use of the language creates the sense of the fantasy world.
Mm-hmm.
Garrod had felt it too. Will wanted nothing so much as to ride hell-bent for the safety of the wall, but that was not a feeling to share with your commander, especially not a commander like this one. So now we know, yeah, Royce is the commander, he is a git, and no one likes him.
Yep. And now you're not able to give him your best knowledge, right? Like, hey, I don't think we should be here because you can't show weakness around him.
Yeah, and that is not effective. His men are now, they don't trust him. They don't respect him. They aren't working with him. They're going, how can we work around him? And that means your unit is not effective.
Yes. And I think we can also extrapolate the fact that now we know that the wildlings most likely come from the north of the wall, and that the wall is a point of safety, of station.
And so, yeah, exactly, where Martin is building out the world. And I quite like they have been writing north and northwest and then north again. And you sort of go, so basically you were writing north. Yeah. But we went northwest for a little bit and then north again. Again, it's that very specific, methodical. No, I need to be clear about what I'm saying, that he's not making intuitive leaps.
That's right. Yeah.
So again, tying it into the perspective of the character. So remember what I said earlier about the repetition of dead. Now, north, northwest, north, cold wind blowing out of the north. So you get north is repeated a lot here. Do you think they're in the north?
I think they could be in the north at this point.
Or maybe northwest. But and that is being combined with that cold and with the darkness. So you're creating, even though you may not fully visualize it, but you're actually creating this picture in your head. It is cold, it is dark, it is in one of those forests that, it's not a nice dappled, comfortable forest. You're thinking almost full of like evergreen, pine needles and those sorts of trees, rather than, oh, look, it's full of apple trees. It's not that kind of forest. And also, he wanted to ride Hellbent for the. Is Hell actually part of the
universe?
The universe in A Song of Ice and Fire?
It's ambiguous. I would say probably no. I would say flames have a very important role to play in the series. Seeing things in the flames, all types of deals. And that could be looked at positively or negatively, depending on where you're geographically located and who you're aligned to. So,
but it's curious because obviously Hellbent. This is one of those things. It sort of presupposes they have a concept of hell, and this is the sort of thing that can trip certain readers up because it is a word that is not sort of native to the story world of Westeros or Essos.
This is George writing, not Will thinking. Yeah.
But I wanted to double check because obviously you know this stuff better than I do. And I wasn't sure whether or not they actually had hell.
Yeah, as much as I would love to defend old Georgie boy, I don't know if I can on this one.
But at the same time, remember, we're reading all of this basically as a translation of a foreign world. So this might be the closest English word to what this concept was in Westerosi.
Yeah, I like that.
So, but the safety of the wall. So by saying that the wall is safe and they are 9 days from it, that puts them in peril.
Tons of danger.
They are unsafe where they currently are. So there is the sort of the finishing out of all of this, the tension, the fear, the terror, the horror. All of this is they are unsafe. And we know that not because he said, we aren't safe here, but by saying over there is safe. Because if over there is safe, here is not safe. It is not included in the over there bit. And so that's giving the reader a sense of something by describing something else.
Yeah, and also giving like almost like a value to a direction in the story. Like, north is dangerous, which further on we find out that actually like the south of this, but north of King's Landing is almost considered like a better place. You know what I mean? Like there's a lot of like playing with directions here. And you kind of get thrown for a loop as a reader.
So I think that covers the vast majority of sort of information that you can glean just from those two very small sections. Like, we did not go through everything that actually happens, but we have a sense of the place, we have a sense of the characters, we have a sense of what time it is, we have a sense of impending danger. So that atmosphere has all been created. We have elements of world building. All of that done extraordinarily efficiently.
Mm-hmm. With a sense of building. Without a bunch of action happening, the scene was building.
And none of it was, right, this is the thing that is happening. This is the power of when something is well written. That you get all of this information. You don't realize that this information is in your head. It's only like we've just been talking through it and pointing these things out. But when you read it, you simply just feel it.
Yeah.
Because when you read through it, you go, oh, well, I don't like Royce. You're like, well, why don't you like Royce? Oh, well, I don't know. I just don't like him. But why? That's why those things are actually in the language. He gets his full name and title. The others don't. Oh, so he's an arrogant shit. And we're looking sort of at him from further away. He's mean to the others, the ones that we're closer to, because we get their first names. And the point of view is with one of them. So we're even closer to him. That's why we side with them. That's why Royce is further away. And then we see he's antagonistic. We see it. That's how you build these things up. And it takes forever to explain how someone has done this. But when you're reading, that's why you pick up these things. You go, how did Martin make me feel tense reading this? Look at the number of times that death is mentioned, darkness is mentioned, that tension and fear and horror are being mentioned, that safety is somewhere else. And you go, oh, so that's how he did it.
Yeah, it seems very intentional. And every time you go over a prologue of someone, that I consider to be like a strong writer, it feels like a lot of this is a lot more intentional than people probably give credit for, which is why writing is such an arduous process. And like, sometimes we wonder, right? Like, why is this author read more or have more of a connection with their reader than someone else, and this is the small things that I do believe are intentional that kind of separate, the pack.
And the thing, if one of the things that you can do is if you had put that in a Word document and you went through and you used the synonym function, not cinnamon function, that's what you put on your desserts, the synonym function, but you can change a bunch of words and you go, does it have the same effect? And you'll go, no, it doesn't. It doesn't feel right. You go, oh, so it feels right the way it's done. Yeah. Do you think maybe an author knows when it feels right? That's what they're going for. They're going for that beat, that rhythm, where things build instead of clash, where it flows instead of jumps around. And all of that is intentional. That's why, people write their first draft to get the stuff done. And then they go back through and they go, this isn't quite right. I need to fix it. They're not talking about, oh, it has a plot hole. That's not what they're fixing. They're actually fixing the writing so that the writing is effectively communicating the things they need it to communicate. And, that can happen over multiple passes. And that is one of the big signifiers, I think, of good writing, is that it flows, where there is deliberate use of the prose to achieve effects in addition to the transmission of the bare bones information.
Yeah, it's like an undercurrent to what is on the surface of what we read as readers. And there's like an intuition that authors have to know that like, this is good. Like, this is something I have to stick with. Maybe this is something I form around, and flowing towards that. and making sure it all fits. And like, I like what you said, not clashing, because there's a lot of times I read something and I feel like it clashes and I can never put my finger on it. And I think that that's actually a really good way of stating it.
And I think what you'll find is the more someone writes, the more you practice. What started out being very laborious and going, right, I need to think of the right word. That it becomes more automatic. If you think the first time that you were learning to drive, well, I'm checking my mirrors and I'm looking at this, and then I'm watching what speed am I doing, and everything. It is so difficult. And now when you're driving, you're like, I'm having a conversation with someone as I'm driving because I am watching that. I'm keeping an eye on my speed. I'm checking my rear view mirror, my side mirror. You're doing it all intuitively now, but it's because you learned and practiced the skill until such time as it now works without you having to put as much direct focus into it. And it still doesn't mean that sometimes when you're driving, you don't go, I'm just going to focus on this. Just we'll talk in a minute. Just let me. There's the junctions are going everywhere. There's cars coming out of nowhere, and there's a fire and a meteorite, and I just let me focus on it. You have moments like that, and that's when the writing isn't flowing. That you go, no, I need to start picking this. I go back to basics. What am I doing here? How are these things linking? And that's the mark of, when good writing and good writers, good authors, that they build towards this. It's not just about, oh, well, I said it was dark and they were in a forest and it was scary. That would have been much faster if Martin had just done that. Much more efficient, but not really engaging. And you wouldn't, oh yeah, Sir Royce is a bit of a git. You don't feel that because someone has just told you, oh, well, he is a bit of a git. You're like, okay, well, I know he's a bit of a git, but you don't feel it. Whereas reading this, you feel it. You feel that he is a git and you don't like him. So what do you think of, going through something like that? Like, is it useful, both as a reader and now that you're writing?
Yeah, I think it's extremely useful to find new reasons to love my favorite prologue as a reader. I always find something new in these books when I reread them, but I've never broken them down like this. So like the next time I read, I have a whole different way of reading now, which I find to be very fun. I mean, some people might think it might be tedious or whatnot, but not for me. And then as a writer, there's two sides of it. One is I think it feels a bit overwhelming because you look at this and you say, wow, like think of how do you finish a book when how this much has to go into writing something that's great, and everyone wants to write something that's great. But another thing I think to think about is the fact that this happens a lot, probably, at least when you're starting out, in the editing process. You do write the spooky forest scene, and it is just a spooky forest scene. And then you say, okay, but how can I use prose to build this? How can I set this atmosphere better? How can I build that crescendo? Because especially with George, one of the things that he does is his prologues are short stories. I would love for us to do Clash of Kings, maybe even just from a structure standpoint, like a little more broader, because the Clash of Kings prologue is fantastic, in my opinion. So it's one of those things where, as a writer, I look at this and yeah, it does seem overwhelming, but it's to know that that's what editing's for. Get it out, and then you tweak it.
But again, like I said with the driving, if someone said to you, right, this is how you drive, these are all the things, and you weren't used to it, it seems overwhelming. Like, how am I meant to do all of these different things? But the more practiced you become at it, you go, well, yeah, like when I was writing, I'd need to say, oh, well, if I do it this way, and that you fall into the groove, it flows. And that's when, when sometimes they say, oh, the muse struck me and the words were just flowing. A lot of that is when you're just in the right frame of mind and the words are naturally doing what you need them to do. The more practiced you become, the more frequently you sort of achieve that state. But for whatever reason, that mightn't be happening. And so you need the tools to be able to look at what you have written to go, this is a bit clumsy. It's not smoothed out yet. It It isn't carrying the subtext I need it to have. It isn't flowing the way that I need it to flow. So that's when you do things like this, where you break it down and you think, how can I do this? What can I change here
Yeah.
that will achieve this? What if I change point of view? How would that affect the scene? If the scene had been from Royce's perspective, how would the scene have been different? Think of the description of the other characters. He certainly wouldn't be looking up to what's the
Garrett.
Garrett. He wouldn't be. He would think of Garrett as a really old, crotchety, wizened, haggard old man.
Yeah.
That's how Royce would view him. Will would probably be that dumb kid, or that simpleton. Probably would fit better in terms of the language. But he might regard Will as a simpleton, and this old, haggard, dirty man. That would be Royce's sort of perception of them. If Garrett was the point of view, how would he view? He might feel protective of Will and
disdain
for Royce. So you can see how even shifting the point of view character actually shifts how you would tell this story.
Yeah, and in a way, I think Will is the appropriate POV because Will is, as we can tell, a little bit inexperienced, even though he's been there a long time, but he's still somewhat inexperienced and a bit, he's dense. He doesn't see everything. He gets to spell everything out for us because as a reader, we are also very ignorant to this world. So it feels like his kind of matter of fact or obvious nods towards information is actually really helpful as the reader. So I can see why George Martin picked Will as the perspective in this prologue.
And on that note, then, thank you very much for joining me, Jimmy. I really appreciate it. This was a lot of fun. We should do it again with another one.
I am always down to become a better reader and a better writer, and that's what these kind of things help me become. So thank you for giving me a new way of reading one of my favorite books of all time. I appreciate it, man.
And for those of you still watching, thank you very much for watching. Thank you for your continued support, and keep turning the page.